Good morning. What a day it's been. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal is likely to be tested for corona today. The Delhi Lieutenant Governor Anil Baijal has scrapped two very controversial orders by the Chief Minister over the last few days. The first was with an order which essentially said that all Delhi government hospitals would only be used to treat patients from Delhi, and that was completely unacceptable because this is one country. So to put artificial barriers of what is available for Delhi citizens and what is available for citizens from Haryana or UP, that is completely unacceptable. And interestingly, in response to Mr. Baijal scrapping the order, Mr. Kejriwal's deputy Manish Sisodia has said that what if people in Delhi are dying and don't have beds, then you will be responsible for this, Mr. Baijal. We have a response to that in our editorial. We'll come to that later. And the second order that Mr. Baijal has quashed is the order which essentially said that only symptomatic people would be tested for corona in Delhi. Now, as we said before, what Mr. Baijal has done is a good thing, but as we've said before, the real problem began with the ICMR order, which essentially restricted the the amount of testing that could be done. What Arvind Kejriwal did was to refine that further and to make it more restrictive. The extra restrictions imposed by Mr. Kejriwal have been removed, but the ICMR order is the original sin, and that is what needs to go. So hopefully sometime later during the day or over the next couple of days we will have more relaxation in that ICMR order, because as we've discussed before, it was a lack of testing in various cities like Delhi and Bombay. Bombay has opened up the restrictions a little bit. It was a low level of testing in these cities. It was a almost complete lack of contact tracing in Delhi, which has been responsible for the dramatic spread of the coronavirus in Delhi. Keep in mind that if you're looking at states or areas which have as large a corona sort of base as Delhi has, I mean Tamil Nadu is the one state which seems to have a higher base and is growing at a faster pace than Delhi. Other most states which have the kind of base that Delhi has are growing at a slower pace. So that Delhi is clearly sort of reaching, I'd say even Bombay levels. It could be worse than Bombay. Keep in mind right now that Delhi has about 8,500 or 8,600 corona beds. There's a Delhi government panel which is essentially said that by mid-July, which is about 5 weeks from now, by mid-July Delhi will need 42,000 beds. Now there is no way that Delhi can possibly make that number of beds available. Firstly, the planning has been very, very poor, and even now what's been happening is that as and when the demand seems to be arising, the Delhi government is saying, okay, we'll make this hotel will be converted into a hospital. In fact, that's the reason why hotels have not been allowed to open up in the capital. Now, frankly, if you're going to convert hotels into hospitals at the kind of pace you're never going to be able to reach the 42,000 beds that you need. We've said this before, I'm saying it again. The only solution now is for the state government to request the central government or the central government to step in on its own and essentially ask the army to set up field hospitals in the cantonment areas and other areas, because that is the only way that you'll get these facilities. Bombay, though, it's reeling under the pressure of corona. I think beds right now in Bombay are at occupancy levels at about 94 or 95%. So though Bombay is reeling under pressure, Bombay has done a fairly good job of creating those jumbo facilities, some of which are less contact facilities. The very state-of-the-art facilities have been set up in very little time by the Maharashtra government and Mumbai. And frankly, if the army comes in, that's something that we need to do in Delhi as well. Otherwise, Delhi is going to be in serious trouble. Our next story is a very good example of the sclerotic way in which the government functions. Now, some weeks ago, you'd recall that when Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman talked about amending the Essential Commodities Act and a lot more freedom for agriculture, a lot of people cheered it. A lot of people felt that this was agriculture's 1991 moment, it's complete freedom and things like that. So the Essential Commodities Act was one of them. So what the Essential Commodities Act does today is it puts stocking limits. So the moment, let's say, the price of onions go up, the central government will say, okay, so now nobody can stock more than X amount. So immediately, people, so let's say it's an exporter who is trying to export onions, that exporter has to, sell the stock immediately. Let's say it's a processing plant which has kept the onions for something, that processing plant has to, dump the onions immediately. So there's a lot of restrictions that came because of the Essential Commodities Act, and it also held back investment there. So what the finance minister said was that we are going to be making this a lot easier. Unfortunately, what she didn't do is she didn't scrap the act, which is a real problem. So she didn't scrap the act. She basically said that only in very very rare circumstances will we use this. So everybody said, okay, there are going to be very rare circumstances, so it's okay, we can live with it. Now when the guidelines came out yesterday, you realize just the kind of fine print that the bureaucracy puts in to completely finish off any government scheme. So basically the fine print says that, okay, so we'll use it in the case of we can use the Essential Commodities Act in case there's a drought, there's a war and there's a pandemic like the one that we have now. And then it says in case there's a 50 or 100% hike in prices of certain, so 50% for cereals and things like that, 100% for perishables. Now the problem is that if you look right now, prices are at an all-time low. So 50% or 100% hike is not going to be unusual at all. So when that price hike takes place, will the government start imposing the ECA controls all over again? In fact, if you look at for many years in the past, if you look at the the post-harvest collapse in prices versus the the increase in prices later on in the year, it's very often of that magnitude. So essentially, the big question now is that did Prime Minister Modi know that this is the way the ordinance is going to be drafted, or is this just his bureaucrats once again, trying to stymie his initiatives by putting in some kind of fine print? As you know, many initiatives of Prime Minister Modi, the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, they made a lot of announcements, but when the fine print has come, we've seen that the measures they've announced really haven't added too much. One of the reasons is this fine print, and so as I said, this is an important story. It tells you just how sclerotic the functioning of the government is. You remember the furor some months ago when Delhi walked out the RCEP, and a lot of people said that this is getting back to protectionism and things like that. So at that time, the government tried to explain to people informally that that isn't strictly true. Essentially, RCEP, our negotiation with RCEP and the kind of concession that the RCEP wanted us to make essentially meant giving concessions to China. So why should we be giving concessions to China? It's much better that India actually negotiate FTAs with America, with the European Union. So that sounded very good, that okay, why are we negotiating with the Chinese? Let's negotiate with the Americans and the Europeans. It sounded very, very good. Now the point is that while there were some initial noises in the weeks after that, nothing has emerged of those FTAs that the government talked about. And Vietnam, if you please, that's on the Financial Express front page today. Vietnam has managed to sign an FTA with the European Union. So Vietnam, keep in mind, is a tiny little country. It's a country which is giving India more than a run for its money in terms of exports. We've seen in the case of mobile phones that as people started moving out of China to produce mobile phones, Vietnam became sort of the country of second choice. So I think about 10 to 12%, maybe 15% of global exports of mobile phones take place from Vietnam today. So when India is looking to counter China, or to say that okay, we're going to attract people coming out of China, once again the country that is stealing a march over us all the time is Vietnam. I wonder if our political leadership will wake up. So far it seems to be content to just talk about how India has reached out to 1,000 companies or 100 companies or 2,000 companies, but you're going to have to work a lot harder if you want to win. Vietnam is a great example of how a small little country can beat the pants off a big country like India. If you're wondering whether India is becoming a lot more industry friendly, we've heard a lot of talk from the Prime Minister and other ministers over the past few months also, about how India plans to be a lot more friendly. Well, a great example of that is the Supreme Court case that one of my colleagues has reported. It's about Cairn Energy. So basically it's about Cairn India. What Cairn India has done is Cairn India had a dispute with the government of India on some cost recoveries, which is perfectly normal. Every country has these disputes with the contractor, the oil and gas contractor that they work with. Well, in this case, what happened was that Cairn went in for international arbitration when the dispute happened. The international arbitrators ruled in favor of Cairn, and once again, the government of India is basically trying to approach the local courts to say that no, there's some problem with the arbitration award. So this is becoming increasingly a pattern that whenever there's a global arbitration award, India starts to challenge it. Now, again, in this case, India, the government is saying that no, these are very special circumstances in this case. The problem is that the government of India, that very few people trust the government of India when it comes to this, because the government of India's track record is very, very poor. Keep in mind that there was a case of Tata and Docomo. Basically, Tata and Docomo had entered into an agreement, and Tata had agreed that if certain parameters, performance parameters were not met, they would buy out Docomo at half the investment that Docomo made. So when those parameters never got made after many years, Docomo wanted to sell out. Tata bought the stake, wanted to buy the stake for 50%, and the government of India said, "No, I'm sorry, you can't do that because that original contract that you signed was against the law." Now, so Docomo went in for global arbitration, and the global arbitrator said that Tata have not met their obligation to Docomo for whatever reason and therefore they have to pay a compensation. The Tatas were delighted because in any case they wanted to make this payment to Docomo. The government of India did not stand to lose a single paisa in this. It was not even a party, but it went and argued in the court that the Docomo award should not be given. So that's a track record of India when it comes to global arbitration. I think this is another reason for foreign investors to get worried about India. And more important, when you look at India's rank in terms of enforcing contracts in the doing business ranks. Essentially, global arbitration was one way for India to fix its ranking, and once again, the government has has cut a sorry figure when it comes to that. Shardul Shroff, who's one of the finest legal minds that corporate India turns to, has a piece in the edit page of Financial Express today where he explains, based on the current ordinance that the government has on the keeping the insolvency IBC code in abeyance. He basically talks about that, explains the perspective, and explains how this is actually going to hurt all the stakeholders in this, whether it's the people who've taken loans, whether it's the banks, and he basically said that we need to look for a way forward. Defending President Trump at the best of times is difficult, because a lot of what he says borders on the fanciful. He really stretches the truth and things like that. Yeah. So when Twitter decided to label one of his tweets. And for another tweet, it said that this tweet violates some Twitter laws and stuff like that. The normal tendency of people was to defend Twitter and to say that President Trump was wrong. One of the newspapers that took the opposite view was Financial Express. We argued that whatever else you might say about whatever President Trump says, but in this case Twitter was clearly in the wrong, and Twitter was labeling what President Trump said, but Twitter had not labeled other people's tweets like this in the past. So it seemed an attempt to, actually target President Trump. And in fact, by doing this, Twitter had become like a publisher. So it was actually exercising the discretion that newspaper editors and publishers have on contributors to them. So Twitter had become a publisher, and it was no longer the public square that it once said it was. A public square essentially means that you can go and anybody can go and say whatever they want. Now it's interesting that Twitter has once again proved that we were right. So Amul, which is known for its irreverent ads. I mean, they had an ad the other day which is called Chini Kam, which is a takeoff on the movie, with Amitabh Bachchan, and and it was a takeoff on the movie, and essentially it was about telling the Chinese to back off. So another ad that Amul had come up with was basically called Exit the Dragon. So Twitter, for a brief while, actually suspended the Amul account. So it just tells you that Twitter is playing the big brother, and so if Twitter feels that it will no longer be open from lawsuits, and it can be shielded from lawsuits because it's a public platform and anybody can say whatever they want on it, that's something which is going to become increasingly difficult to defend. I think courts the world over and governments will start taking the view that Twitter is actually censoring people, so therefore Twitter is responsible for whatever people post on it. That's a very unfortunate development for Twitter, but that's for Twitter and its investors to worry about. Have a great week ahead. Thank you.